Good morning, everyone. It's quite a while since I did a talk, but I thought I'd do one today, and it's called Love Your Enemies, the message of the Sermon on the Mount. Let's get to a nice, relaxed state of mind and ready to take in the words and the ideas. Obviously, we ought to think for ourselves, not accept things blindly, but just to learn to listen and make your own decisions about everything in life, really. The message to love your enemies is of vital importance today, with so many individuals, groups, and even countries advocating the outmoded eye for an eye doctrine, and many of them claiming to be Christian. But that is not possible if those people truly mean to follow the teachings attributed to Jesus, as we shall discover during this talk. H.P. Blavatsky had quite a bit to say on this subject in her writings. So let's start by trying to understand what is meant by Christ. Most Christians use the term Jesus Christ, but how many are aware of what that really means? Jesus was the man. Christ is a state of consciousness reached by few. She says in the article, The Esoteric Character of the Gospels, Christ, the true esoteric Saviour, is no man, but the divine principle in every human being. He who strives to resurrect the spirit crucified in him by his own terrestrial passions and buried deep in the sepulchre of his sinful flesh, he who has the strength to roll back the stone of matter from the door of his own inner sanctuary, he has the hidden Christ in him, or her, of course. So the Sermon on the Mount is found in chapter 5 of Matthew and contains the essential teachings of Jesus. H.P. Blavatsky says in Isis Unveiled, Volume 2, page 575, that as for the Sermon on the Mount, its conspicuous doctrines are more or less repudiated by every Christian community of any considerable dimensions. Barbarism, oppression, cruel punishments are as common now as in the days of paganism. The whole of chapter 5 in the Gospel of Matthew is a passionate protest of the man of peace, love, and charity against the cruel, stern, and selfish commandments of the man of war, the Lord of Moses. Yea, ye have heard that it hath been said of them in old times, and so on, and so and so. But I say unto you quite the reverse. Ye have heard that it hath been said by them of old times, so and so. But I say unto you quite the reverse. And then she goes on to say that society creates its own outcasts, criminals, and profligates, and then condemns and punishes its own Frankensteins, sentencing its own progeny, the bone of its bone and flesh of its flesh, to a life of damnation on earth. Yet that society recognizes and enforces most hypocritically Christianity, i.e. churchianity. Shall we then, or shall we not, infer that the latter, or churchianity, is unequal to the requirements of mankind? Evidently, the former, and most painfully and obviously so, in its present dogmatic form, which makes of the beautiful ethics preached on the Mount a Dead Sea fruit, a whited sepulchre, and no better. And in collected writings, she says, the Sermon on the Mount, which is the very embodiment of Christ's teachings, Christianity in a nutshell, so to say, is a code of preeminently practical as also impractical rules of life, of daily observances, yet all on the plane of matter-of-fact earth life. Interesting. And finally, again in collected writings, Count Leo N. Tolstoy does not believe in the Bible, the Church, or the divinity of Christ, and yet no Christian surpasses him in the practical bearing out of the principles alleged to have been preached on the Mount. And these principles are those of Theosophy, not because they were uttered by the Christian Christ, but because they are universal ethics and were preached by Buddha and Confucius, Krishna, and all the great sages, thousands of years before the Sermon on the Mount was written. Hence, once that we live up to such Theosophy, it becomes a universal panacea. Indeed, for it heals the wounds inflicted by the gross asperities of the church isms, on the sensitive soul of every naturally religious man or woman. And the Theosophical Master K.H. wrote in the Mahatma Letters that 2/3 of the world's evil is caused by religion or organized religion. This is due to the fact that religions were started by inferior mortals who introduced all the lower emotions and feelings of humanity into the concept of religion and also into their God, of course. And there are many who believe that Jesus was influenced by Buddhist teachings. But Buddhism had reached the Middle East at that time, and the teachings in the Sermon on the Mount have a definite Buddhist feel to them. So let's have a whistle-stop look at what's known as the Beatitudes. So the teachings start off with Jesus blessing certain people. These are known as the Beatitudes. Jesus blesses the poor in spirit, which is generally regarded as meaning humble. He says, for theirs will be the kingdom of heaven, a pointer to the fact that it will not be the proud or boastful that will eventually reign, but those who are gentle and kindly, despite the materialistic world encouraging us to be tough and competitive. Look what problems that's caused in the modern world. The word poor is difficult, as there are no definitions that point to it meaning humble, but just deficient. So perhaps he is just blessing those who haven't much spirituality at the moment and pointing to the fact that even they will eventually be enlightened. So he is encouraging those who may be struggling. It is an act of compassion. He also blesses those who mourn, as they will be comforted, perhaps because in time they will be reunited with those they lose, or by realizing their divine nature, they will see through the illusions of life, which will cause them suffering, and they will be comforted by their own higher self, by their own divine nature. Then there are the meek, who shall inherit the earth. Here is a great promise that it will not be the violent ones who will reign supreme, but those who promote peace and goodwill. Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Again, encouragement is given, almost as if Jesus is predicting and giving us hope. And it's just as valid to take this to heart today, when so much violence surrounds us on a daily basis. The power of the Spirit will prevail in the end. All else is transitory, even violence and bigotry. So that he says, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Again, this may refer to karma. Jesus said those who live by the sword will die by it. In the same way, those who show mercy will receive it. This even works in the framework of our ordinary lives. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. So it is by purifying ourselves that we are able to become recipient of the soul of the world, as Emerson says, Ralph Waldo Emerson. Too much materialistic thought and action creates clouds in front of the sunlight of pure spirit. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. In Theosophy, our view of God is different than the orthodox one. We look upon it as a formless divinity in the heart of all forms. Here, Jesus again emphasizes that not only the meek and pure in heart will triumph in the end, but also the peacemakers. They are the children of the light, and no matter how the purveyors of violence seem to be on top of it at these times, all their efforts are on the lower planes of being, and therefore transient and doomed to failure in the long run. The spiritual is guaranteed to win through in the end, for us as human beings and in the wider context. Blessed are they who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So the kingdom of heaven is a state of consciousness, not really a place. It is within us, to use a very inaccurate term. It is what we are in essence. Here he gives another prediction. He knows that those who follow the true way will be persecuted, often by those professing to be Christian or Muslim, as well as materialistic people, etc. So again, he gives us encouragement, as they will never win in the final analysis. Remember that, they will never win in the final analysis. All the great conflicts like the Second World War, although there's much suffering and much death, the evil didn't win in the end. We need only fear those who can kill the soul, not those who kill the body, which is a temporary vehicle. We, in essence, cannot be killed. We can lose sight of our spiritual nature as a result of our lifestyle and our thoughts, but in reality, our true self is untouched by all of this. In fact, the whole of the Beatitudes are meant to inspire and uplift those who are trying to live a truly spiritual life. He then says that we are the light of the world, and that we should let that light shine for all to see. In the darkness of the Kali Yuga, those who are able to understand a little of the spiritual life should share it and spread it and show that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Think of that. We are the light of the world. He goes on to say, for I say unto you that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no wise enter the kingdom of heaven. So unless we get beyond the dead letter, followed by orthodox religionists that he mentions, we will never become enlightened. We have to have an inspiration of our own to guide us and light our way along the path. It is said that thou shalt not kill, but Jesus says we should not even call our fellow human being a fool. And if we hypocritically take offerings to a temple or pretend to be living a spiritual life whilst harboring grudges against someone or backbiting or slandering, we should make peace with that person before making any offerings and look into our own nature, why we have that attitude. Again, the Buddhist non-violent way is promoted, and this is brought even more to the fore as his teachings progress. He says that even looking at a married woman with lust is committing adultery, as thoughts are even more potent than actions. he very much follows the Buddhist precepts that are found in some form in various religions. And the Buddhist ones go, the first one is, I undertake the training rule to abstain from killing. The second, I understand the training rule to abstain from taking what is not given. 3, I undertake the training rule to avoid sexual misconduct. 4, I undertake the training rule to abstain from false speech. 5, I undertake the training rule to abstain from fermented drink that causes heedlessness. Of course, these are rules for those who are committed to living a spiritual life or a monastic life. But no rules are deterministic and must be adapted to the individual's lifestyle. We mustn't follow rules blindly. This is one of the big problems with society, that people do that. It causes a lot of problems. But these are just guidelines to help us to understand a little bit more about life and how to live in a way that we can manifest a spirit. And it's up to the individual how much they want to follow those rules and how keen they are to develop their spiritual nature. But now we get to the crux of the whole sermon. Ye have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, resist not him that is evil. But whosoever smiteth thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if any man would go to law with thee, and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. And whoever shall compel thee to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee, turn thou not away. If you have heard that it was said, thou shalt love thy neighbour and hate thine enemy, but I say unto you, love your enemies, bless those that curse you, and pray for them that persecute you, that ye may be the sons of your Father which is in heaven. For he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sendeth rain on the just and the unjust. For if you love them that love you, what reward have ye? Do not even the publicans the same? And if ye salute your brethren only, what do ye more than others? Do not even the Gentiles the same? Ye therefore shall be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect. So here is more of the passionate protest of Jesus against some of the teachings in the Old Testament. It was obviously a time for a more enlightened worldview. If someone strikes you, don't perpetuate the violence by hitting back. Break the cycle by refusing to give in to anger. Bring your consciousness to the center of the storm, where all is tranquil, and walk away calmly. Material goods are not worth holding on to. So if someone wants to take your coat, give him your cloak also. What does it matter? Give in, because to overcome the hold of the ego, we must not try to defend our position or hold on to a sense of personality. We must be prepared to give to others if what we have benefits ourselves only. If we just have love for our family and friends, then that is no different than thieves and murderers. The really big test is to love those who we may find it difficult to get on with, those who lead lives that we do not necessarily agree with. They too have the divine within them, maybe more deeply hidden, but it's there. Our attitude should always be to help and not condemn. Too many modern films and TV encourage revenge, which is never right. Only love and forgiveness is effective in the end. Well, this is hard, whereas revenge is easy. The Buddha says hatred does not cease by hatred. Hatred only ceases by love. This is the eternal law. We must learn to see the divine in others. And if we have any trace of enmity or dislike for anyone or anything, then we cannot call ourselves spiritual, because we haven't learned to see beyond the physical. We have to look into why we we are the attitude towards someone. We have to come to a state of reliance on the divine within and to live in its light. It also hints that we can become perfect, even as God is, meaning we are all gods in the making. So Jesus goes on to say, "And why are ye anxious concerning raiment? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. Yet I say unto you, that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God doth so clothe the grass of the field, which today is and tomorrow is cast into the oven, shall he not much more clothe you, O ye of little faith? Be not therefore anxious, saying, what shall we eat? What shall we drink? Or wherewithal shall we be clothed? For after all these things do the Gentiles seek. For your heavenly Father knoweth that you have need of all these things. But seek ye first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." But I remember reading in an article by H.P. that someone criticised her for subscription fees for the TS, a Theosophical Society, and quoted these lines. And she replied by saying that rent and taxes had to be paid. So this was impractical in the city. But what the verses are saying is that we should put the spiritual before all else. We have to obviously live in the world as well. Unless we live in the mountains somewhere, we can't always rely on nature to provide everything for us. But we are, in the final analysis, spiritual beings. Nothing can touch the spiritual side of us. And that should be our talisman, our guide and inspiration through everything. He goes on to say that we should work on our own faults and not the faults of others, cast the beam out of our own eyes before we attempt to cast the splinter out of another's, and that we should be careful what information we impart to others in case they misunderstand and resent what we have told them or misuse the information. Cast not pearls before swine. But if you ask, it shall be given to you. And if you seek, you shall find. And this is encouragement, because what we are doing is awakening to what we truly are in essence already. So if we take the previous advice running through the Sermon on the Mount, that we should put our spiritual progress before anything else in our life, then we'll find our true treasure, because all else in our lives is transitory. The Diamond Sutra says, "Thus shall ye think of all this fleeting world, a star at dawn, a bubble in a stream, a flash of lightning in a summer cloud, a flickering lamp, a phantom, and a dream." So the sermon is very Buddhistic in its teachings. Jesus is instructing us to live a peaceful life and a life of forgiveness. Again, don't forgive just 7 times, but 70 times 7 times, he tells us. Remember the quote of H.P. Blavatsky I used earlier? As for the Sermon on the Mount, its conspicuous doctrines are more or less repudiated by every Christian community of any considerable dimensions. Barbarism, oppression, cruel punishments are as common now as in the days of paganism. So Christians nowadays would find it almost impossible to follow these guidelines. It's not a matter of following dogmatic rules. The spiritual path is not about following rules or repeating text parrot fashion. It's about acting spontaneously under the guidance of one's own divine self. It's about turning one's attention to that divine self and seeing the world and one's fellow creatures in a new light. It's about storing our treasures in heaven and building our spiritual home on solid rock rather than shifting sand. And it's about learning to apply what we have learned for the good of others. The Sermon on the Mount is a guide to how we should live, but like all other teachings, we should not take them dogmatically and add them to the stifling library of our lower mental images that cloud our true perceptions. Instead, we should take them and give them wings, and we should think carefully about their application in our lives and those of others. Investigate what is meant to return love for hatred, its implications, its practical application. Look into the reasons that so many people in this world find it so hard to follow these rules, and why so many do completely the opposite. These are the core issues that we, as theosophical or spiritual students of any kind, should be taking into consideration and looking into. Rumi, the Sufi poet, says, "Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it." This is because love is at the back of everything. It is the harmony of the universe, and the only disharmony is caused by the undisciplined mind of man. This disciplining of the mind is the key. Not a strict and dogmatic discipline, but the development of real preference for something higher, better, and more stable in our lives and our existences. This is the final ingredient in any alchemical formula. The motive to seek for this love, which is the basis of the universal brotherhood that Theosophy promotes. Without it, as said earlier, we are trying to build our house on shifting sand instead of the solid rock. Political brotherhoods are bound to fall for this reason. Society tries to survive in the cold light of materially orientated ideals. Art, science, education misses out the animation that spiritual life can give to us. We are taught to memorize, become like automatons, like computers. Sport is encouraged, and millions of people put their mind power to developing the physical body. They build up the lower mental will instead of the spiritual. Exercise, of course, is valuable for physical health and maybe by mental strength as well. But much more is needed. This takes them further away from their awakening. The Sermon on the Mount, like most spiritual teachings, is showing us a way to change the focus of our lives to something higher and more permanent. As said earlier, we will store our treasures in heaven and seek first the kingdom of God or the divine. This means that we should not neglect the ordinary things of this world and our material duties to family, etc., but that we should always hold the spiritual to be more important to us than anything else, because the things of this world are only given to us for a few short years, a few short decades before we move on. The spirit, the divine, we have for eternity, which is the golden thread that runs through all our lives, according to ancient teachings. Once we are fully awakened to its presence, we become immortal, because, as H.P. Blavatsky tells us, immortality is but one's unbroken consciousness. The idea that consciousness is ever broken is another illusion, really, brought about by our limited understanding of what we are in reality. This constricted view gives us our illusion of separateness from others. The world that we live in only came into being as our illusion of separateness became more and more pronounced as we fell further and further into matter. In reality, nothing ever changed apart from the perception of the divine, which brought about its viewing of itself through imagined diversity. So the sermon is giving us a way to live harmoniously. Some of the teachings seem very harsh. That's only according to modern ideas and ideals of morality. Jesus is telling us to love one another, to forgive, to return love for hatred, to respect others, not to be swayed by material possessions, to trust in the divine and to live in its light. There's nothing here about punishment or revenge, which have been prevalent in religion, particularly Christianity and Islam, through the centuries. It is interesting that both these religions are monotheistic and both prefer the God of the Old Testament to the one of the New, as does the Jewish. Perhaps this is because he is more, this idea of God is more reflective of the lower aspects of human nature, not man made in the image of God, but God made in the image of man. In fact, Jehovah has been identified with a minor, tribal, bloodthirsty God. That's why he needs worship and propitiation from his followers. A real God would not want that or need that. As said, the sermon teachings seem far more akin to Buddhism than any other religion of the time. When Jesus faced Pontius Pilate before his alleged crucifixion, Pilate asked him, "What is truth?" And Jesus remained silent, as if to say that truth is beyond words and even thoughts. How could you explain truth, especially to someone like Pontius Pilate? Yet the whole of the Sermon on the Mount is a passionate plea for peace, as H.P. Blavatsky said, and that plea echoes down through the centuries and into these troubled times where brutality rules, even in the workplace and schools and day-to-day life, with hardness of heart being praised and kindness associated with weakness. I remember in school, we were always saying, who's the hardest, who's the toughest, but not who's the kindest, who's the gentlest. And blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. It is meekness and gentleness that will win through in the end and needs to be cultivated. And in a future golden age, these qualities will be predominant. Herbert Newton says, Christ founded no church, established no state, made no laws, and imposed no governments or exterior authority. He simply set himself to write the law of God in the hearts of men in order that they might govern themselves. So the ideal of every true spiritual teacher is to write the law of God or the divine in our hearts so that they become part of the landscape of our being. Later followers translate those unwritten teachings into words, and soon the original impetus is lost. Rules are guidelines for the early part of the spiritual journey. Eventually, we have to trust ourselves to the guidance of our higher self and live in its light. HPB says that the teachings in the sermon relate to matter-of-fact earth life. Indeed, all these set rules relate to our daily lives. Our inner life is on another plane altogether and is in no need of rules or regulations, which would only confine and limit its actions on this plane. It is easy to become lost in externals and to believe that the blind following of rules will somehow lead us to the goal. The truth is that there has to be something else that prevents us falling into the dead letter. And this is the fate of most people that follow religions or philosophical and spiritual organizations. There has to be that strong desire to go out towards the infinite and the ability to be aware of the essence of the words written. Let's not be a slave to words. They are shapes on paper, trying badly to convey something living and real. What is important is to be in tune with that essence and try to be aware of what was really being conveyed, which is way beyond words or even images. In any true spiritual work, the words are just portals through which one must pass to get to the real meaning. So the Sermon on the Mount gives us practical teachings to enable us to live in the world with our fellow human beings. Most of the teachings are social rather than particularly spiritual. We have to live together on this planet. So here are guidelines as to how to live in harmony so as to be able to pursue our spiritual goals. It points very strongly to the fact that we should place our spiritual values before our material ones, while not neglecting our day-to-day duties. We should understand that life in this world is very transitory, and we should concentrate much more on the spiritual life. Being gentle and kind in this society, as I've said earlier, is regarded as a weakness. This is regarded as acceptable to bulldoze and bully people, regarded as being a soft touch. But the sermon tells us that the meek will inherit the earth. In the Tao Te Ching, it is said that the mighty and great will be laid low, the humble and weak will be exalted. He also says that the merciful will obtain mercy. And again, to quote the Tao Te Ching, heaven will come to the rescue of the merciful and protect them with its mercy. Heaven will come to the rescue of the merciful and protect them with its mercy. This is very significant, given what he says about the merciful and the meek, what Jesus says about the merciful and the meek inheriting the earth. Because the divine manifests through a mind that is gentle, meek, humble, mild, and merciful, not through a hardened mind that has created a wall between itself and the divine. The heart must be soft, pliant, and receptive to the promptings of the higher self. Why do you think governments, scientists, and even artists, poets, and writers are generally more materially orientated nowadays? It's because society has walled itself off from what really matters. And though might seem to be right nowadays, and it will kill society and create people who are like automatons with merely second-hand thoughts and very little of any spontaneity in their lives. Also with not many emotions apart from the lower ones. The teachings are the sort that can be applied in general by those spiritually orientated and by followers of all religions, but also by socialists and even atheists, because they are rules for living a gentle and compassionate life. There's no guarantee that living in tune with these teachings will lead to any kind of spiritual awakening or enlightenment, but they will certainly prepare the ground for people who want to follow that path. And they will help us to relate to our fellow human beings in a positive and loving way. And we'll go towards creating a heaven on earth, because that is where heaven really is. The kingdom of heaven is within us. And it is that collectivity that can transform the world that we live in. So the teachings are mainly social. So let's just recap on some of the points I've mentioned. So while I was reading a book called The Gospel in Brief by Tolstoy, it's a very simple but important point struck me. A point which runs through this talk. Tolstoy attempts to put the Gospels into his own words and paraphrase Jesus' teachings. The purists may not like this, but it has been done many times by others throughout history. What comes through to me is that Jesus is advising us to place spirituality before everything else, even family, social issues, politics, even religion, because all these things are temporary and can be taken from us at any time. Of course, I've emphasized this point many times in this talk. Life is fragile as regards our personal life in this world. We don't know if we will be here tomorrow, so we need to store our treasures in heaven, as mentioned earlier. It is definitely the keynote of this book and of Jesus's teachings in the Sermon on the Mount. So again, I'll emphasize, he's not saying that we should neglect our families, etc. We have to fulfill our duties, especially self-chosen ones. We should not be totally consumed by them, as most people are. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven or of God. In the true sense of the word God, not a God who is worse than any ordinary human being, getting angry and jealous and destroying people and entire cities because of some minor infringement or because they won't worship him, and totally lacking any kind of compassion. Learn to love the permanent divinity in your family and friends, as well as of all humanity. Try to see and feel the divine in all things. Of course, you'll feel a deeper connection and closeness to your family and friends, but try to see the good in others too. If a person has 99 faults and only one virtue, forget the faults and work on that virtue. Look upon the race of humanity as divine. Look upon others as fellow pilgrims, struggling along the pathless path with you, and be ready to reach out a helping hand rather than condemn. talking about looking at, person having 99 faults and one virtue and trying to work on that virtue. No, it's the opposite, of course. People have 99 virtues and one fault, and people emphasize the fault. And that's one of the main problems in society nowadays. So like I said, reach out a helping hand rather than condemn. For you may have been on their path in past lives and may still go there yet. Remember that. Also, we can never understand the path of another and what lessons they are learning. It may be that they live lives repulsive to us to gain understanding. Judge and you may be judged yourself someday. So as the Theosophical masters say, try. And also, as they say, love your fellow pilgrims. Tolstoy also wrote another book, The Law of Love and the Law of Violence, in which he discusses the matter of conscientious objectors in times of war. He writes of one young man who was imprisoned because he refused to fight in a war. And of course, many were executed for the same reason. This man said that he was a Christian, and that if he followed Jesus' teachings, there is no way he could fight in a war, because Jesus said that we should love our enemies. And there's a commandment that thou shalt not kill, and no exceptions are mentioned. Jesus also emphasized and says that he who lives by the sword will perish by the sword, as I've said. Tolstoy emphasizes that Jesus taught the way of love and writes, I do not know, and no one can know, if the use of violence or resignation when threatened with evil will be useful or useless, harmful or harmless. But what I do know, and what everyone knows, is that love is good. It is good when men feel affection for me. It is much better if I feel affection for men and women, of course. In fact, the greatest good of all is my affection for all, not only for those who love me, but also, as Christ said, for those who hate me and injure me. Strange as it may be to anyone who has not felt this, it is nevertheless true. And the more I ponder on it, the more surprised I am not to have felt it sooner. Real love, which denies self and identifies its ego with another, is synonymous with the awakening in the soul of the superior, universal principle of life. And this is true love, and it gives all the good that it can give when it is only love. That is to say, when it is free of any personal interest. And it is this kind of love that must be felt for the enemy or the offender. That is why the recommendation to love not only those who love you, but also those who hate you, is no exaggeration. It simply indicates the impossibility of any exception and the possibility of gaining the highest good that love can give. The fact that it should be so is self-evident. One must feel it to be convinced. As soon as one has felt it, offences and attacks become undesirable. It follows that the human soul suffers when one opposes evil with evil, and on the other hand, feels the greatest happiness in returning good for evil. End of quote. So what inspires people to invent weapons that project bits of metal into others to render the physical body inactive, or to torture and cause pain, or to blow their fellow human beings to pieces? How strange, isn't it? Isn't it kind of insanity when one looks at it objectively? John Lennon said, our society is run by insane people for insane objectives. I think we're being run by maniacs for maniacal ends. I think I'm liable to be put away as insane for expressing that. That's what's insane. And Jesus said, all that I ask of you is that you love others as I have loved you. That's the real deal. Let us here at the very least try to do that. The Zen saying is 7 times down, 8 times up. So if we fail at this, then try again. 7 times down, 8 times up. In these dark times, in what we call the age of Kali, it is of utmost importance that there are at least some who are willing to not to keep their light under a bushel, but let it shine in the darkness as a beacon light for all those who are lost on this stormy sea of life. And the importance of this needs to be recognized as being far more important than the mere gathering of facts without any real practical application. And also the importance of people coming together in groups and lodges and meditation groups, etc., and creating centers of positive energy, which can radiate out into the world around us and within us, and do substantial good for the consciousness of humanity in general and the consciousness of the planet. Thank you very much for listening, those who did. All I can say to you is Om Shanti, 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 peace, 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 peace on earth and goodwill to all beings. Thank you very much.